All right, everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil. And in this video, guys, I want to talk about core factions. We're going to talk core factions, and then we're going to talk about factions I've identified as like spec ops, right, or special operations. I'll kind of get into these, and what I want to do, the way I would preface them. Whoops, that's a misclick. How I determined between are you a core faction versus are you a like special operations team is. With a core faction, it's something I recommend you get normally before something is required of you, right? And, sometimes that blurs a little bit with some of them, which you guys will see, like, you can kind of figure those out. But, like, I recommend, like, we'll use the example that, spoiler, right? Darth Vader. But I recommend you get Darth Vader and you get him early, long before you ever need him for something, right? Same thing with, like, Mara Jade and Emperor Palpatine, right? Before they're actually needed for certain farms, I recommend you build them because they're a core faction and they're that good. So let's get into it, guys. As always, before we do that, we must first pay homage to our king, Wampa. You guys know that I have a contract with absolutely no one that states I must pay homage to our king in every video. Guys, our goal is to hit 5,000 subscribers. You guys have asked for it for so long in the comments. I will relegate Wampa as long as we hit 5,000 subscribers, guys. Remember, Wampa may not have a faction, but he's always right here in our hearts. All right, so our core factions, guys. And these factions, if you want to see them in more detail, I do have a 2023 farming guide. So you guys can see that the factions will kind of follow along with this guide, right? So, I just kind of picked out what I consider to be the core factions and put them on a list. So let's get started here. Obviously, Darth Vader is the first. You guys know that. He slots in really well with this Empire team down here, right, if we need to. For PvP, a lot of times Darth Vader can solo teams, and then you have this team down here to kind of clean up. I'm very intentional. You guys know this if you've watched the channel for a while, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. Make sure you subscribe. But I leave that fifth slot open a lot of times, or I'll leave like fourth and fifth slots open when I think that, I could put Royal Guard in here. I could put Darth Vader in here. But I like giving you that flexibility to choose your own squads, right? Come up with what you want. Like, don't feel locked in that you absolutely have to have these four. They're just examples of characters that I think fit in well with the farming guide and fit in well with, progressing through the game. Next, you have your Imperial Troopers. Again, that fifth slot is open for whoever you would like. Again, just following that farming guide, right? You see those are the first couple of things you're going to be farming in this is, your Empire and Imperial Troopers. You don't need a ton of gear for them. They are fantastic characters all around. So they're a good solid team. Even at lower gear, they do really, really well. Then you have Commander Luke team. I cannot talk about how much I love this team enough. And this is the end product, right? Initially you might only have, Han, Luke, and, 3PO and Chewie. And then you'll get Chewbacca and C-3PO as you progress through. But just wanted to have them here that, you start building them again in that farming guide. I will make sure I link that in the description down below. I don't think I mentioned that yet, but I will link that below. Also, this is the perfect time to plug the Discord server. We currently have a giveaway going on right now thanks to Danny Mueller, and that's at the time of recording. So if you're watching this like way down the line, like don't expect a giveaway. But you guys can go ahead and join the Discord server. I will have that link and the farming guide linked as well, guys. So make sure you stay tuned with that. All right, so then we have our bounty hunters, which again get you Chewbacca, so you kind of see they fit hand in hand here. I don't need to cover how good they are in every single faction, guys, right? But the bounty hunters are kind of that other core faction that we talk about. This is the reason these characters are in here is because we're getting Beskar Mando, and we're going to be going for our executor, so we want to make sure that we have those built. And then we have the, Keepers of the Peace, right? Our Jedi. Jedi Knight Revan, fantastic character. Again, in the farming guide, you're going to follow along. You get your executor, and then it's time to get Revan, right? So again, just following along, getting Darth Revan and Malak. And Malak becomes that, first, after the Executor, obviously, right? But Malak kind of really leads in nicely to, you've got a character that you can spend your Get One on. If you're following the farming guide, you start going through some other things, right? But Malak's just this is a really solid team in so many different aspects of the game that I feel it's just so important that you have them there, right? And then the Padme squad. This team is so good. And again, if you don't have to follow a farming guide step by step, like it's not something I expect you guys to do. This is just the way that I built it. And, There's flaws in that, absolutely. I'm not perfect. As much as I love to think that I am not perfect. So Padme team, guys, this team is so good. They're all needed for something in some aspect of the game. And then obviously leading into the General Grievous, because in the farming guide, you'll go through and eventually we get down to our General Skywalker, which he's down here. Yeah, there we go. So the General Skywalker team, right? We want to make sure we're building that. So these core factions kind of following along in that farming guide, which then obviously lead into General Skywalker with the 501st himself. The last thing I want to mention, and guys, I'm not going into all these teams. I've covered them so much. I want to get to the special operations ones. So the Geonosians are the last things here. They're worth mentioning. I don't know that I can call them a core faction per se, because I think that they have much more limited uses, but you need them for Wat Tambor, so it is worth mentioning. All right, the Spec Ops. And these are the factions that characters that you shouldn't. Time out. Let me reset here. These are factions that you shouldn't build until you're ready for that character, right? Bad Batch kind of is on that line, so that's why they're first. Of if you built them early, I'm not going to complain, but you don't really need them until you're ready for Lord Vader, right? Fantastic team. They add a lot of depth. You can throw in the little Kiwi Omega if you want. That way she can work with Hunta and Echo and Tick and Rekka. Let me know how I did in that impression, guys. I think that went pretty well. But yeah, great faction, but not something that you need to be building early on, especially with how gear intensive they are. So I want to mention Starkiller right now. Starkiller's Rex are all either, Mara Jade is in a core team, and then the rest of those characters, spoiler alert, are going to be down below. I have him here. I don't have his squad because there's a lot of different ways to run him. Obviously, the most popular is, Palpatine, Mara Jade, Starkiller, Jedi, and unaligned Force user. The thing is, though, I want to mention him, but I don't consider I tried to refrain from using some of those characters. There's no Aphra Inquisitors, Jedi Knight Luke isn't on this list. I left off some of those things that I think are yes, they're really good, but there's more to those, right? There's a lot more complexity there. So next we have the Rebel Fighters. Guys, this squad is fantastic, right? They run turn meter trains on you for so long. Kyle Katarn, obviously a requirement for Starkiller, Mon Mothma, Profundity, and Jedi Master Luke requirement. But then you get to these three characters. And these are characters that Cara Dune you need for Beskar Mando, but I haven't touched mine since that event, and she is gear 8. Pow and Hoth Rebel Scout, really not needed for anything. And so I put them on here as this, yes, this is a great special operations team. This is so good. This is worth investing in. But you have to be very intentional about gearing this team up, right? This isn't something that's going to just happen overnight. You really have to pay attention and get these characters. So next is the Rogue One team. So similar to Bad Batch in a way, right? Adrad, Cassian, and Jin are all requirements for the Profundity. So you will, naturally, eventually if you're chasing Profundity, right, you get them. But you don't get their best 4th and 5th units. I threw K2 here because he has a lot of good synergy with these characters. But honestly, the way that I view this team is that because it's so much farther into that, late game kind of area, I think it's important to mention that they are a really good special operations team. That these teams all add height and depth to your roster, right? Or height and width, I like to say. Height is something that means that you can kill, or be a higher level, team, right? So a Galactic Legend, right? They add height to your roster, right? They make your roster taller, that you can, beat more teams with a Galactic Legend than without them. A team like the, Bad Batch, right? They don't really allow you to beat anything that General Skywalker can't beat, right? General Skywalker is a better team than Bad Batch, but Bad Batch will allow you to expand that, I can kill 3 or 4 teams in this category rather than down in here, right? So kind of the same way with these guys. They're a really good team, and they add a little bit of height, but a lot more, width to your roster. And we have the Maul Mandalorians, right? We have our Maul with his favorite thing to scream in all of Star Wars, Kenobi! I do apologize for everybody watching, and especially to Sam Whitwer, because you do a much better job at that than I do. But this is an unbelievable faction, guys. Unbelievable faction. I just relicked my Canderous. You guys know that earlier I had released a 11 relics. I wish I had. Finally did Canderous. But this faction just, again, that same height and width concept, right? That with your core factions, a lot of those they add that most of those are just going to be width, right? That they're not going to allow you to kill like a gas. You can kill Galactic Legends with General Grievous in some instances, but this team here, again, adding that height and width, that they're fantastic. They do a lot of really good things. I do recognize that Maul's a conquest character, but I wanted to put him on here because he's the only conquest character that, like, when you get Darth Malgus, right? I just want to use Darth Malgus as an example, right? You get Darth Malgus, you have a Sith Empire team most likely, right? So, Malgus just goes into that team. You might have to be very intentional about building these characters if you don't have them by the time you get Maul, and that's why they're on this list. Obviously, Jango and Bo-Katan are requirements for Jedi Master Kenobi. Beskar Mando is part of that Executor fleet, who I tell you guys, like, he's a mandatory, you just have to relic him because of how good he is. And Canderous, you need at least like gear 11 for Malak. So you've got a relic, but you've got to kind of be intentional about building this team if you want them to be good, if you don't have those recs already. So just, keeping that in mind, guys. All right, next is the prepared squad. You guys know I want Vandor and L3 at relic levels. I think this is a great faction. They definitely add that height and width to your roster. They do a lot of really good things. What puts them here, obviously, is like Dash is a profundity requirement, and you need him for Starkiller. The other characters, they're just not required for anything. You're not going to naturally come through, gearing them for anything in particular. And so that's kind of why they make this special operations list, kind of similar like the Rebel fighter units, right? Even similar like, all the Mandalorians on this list too, is that they're great factions, right? They're great teams, but you have to be intentional about building them and taking time out of building something else that's like a Galactic Legend or in the Journey Guide, right? All right, next is the Darth Traya squad, the Sith Triumvirate with Darth Talon, who is a, Starkiller requirement. The Darth Traya squad, even without her Omicron, even before her Omicron, they were a great faction. They're just a good, I almost had them on the core team list, but because they're not needed for anything, right? Because you don't need Traya, Nihilus, or Scion for any kind of Galactic Legend, Journey Guide character, I put them in the Special Operations list. And I think that's perfect where they belong. They add a lot. They are capable of beating Padme, right? They're very capable of beating Padme. Obviously, with Traya's Omicron, you're beating Lord Vader at the time of recording. We don't know if that gets nerfed or whatever. So, bear that in mind. But they're just a really good faction. There's a lot of ways you can use them. They're very versatile. What I say with this squad that makes them so good is that their kit is just based on, hey, if the other team's debuffed, you're going to get health back through Traya Elite or Darth Nihilus. It's all about health steal. And so they just have a lot of ways that they can work together and benefit each other, that they're just a, really, really, like, special operations faction. They're definitely more of a, without the Omicron, they're a width team, right? That they're not going to let you beat something that you can't do now, probably, like by the time you would get them. But you throw the Omicron on, they're definitely adding height. Last team on this list is the Night Sisters. With Night Sisters, again, they're running into that roadblock of like only Asajj Ventress is needed for anything because she's part of the General Skywalker event. But the other characters, they're not needed for anything. They're a very good faction, do not get me wrong. They do a lot of really interesting things. They can beat General Grievous for 60 banners, which obviously before Wampa and Bad Batch, that was a huge deal, right? To be able to, 60 banners against Grievous, that was like entering General Skywalker territory, right? That was entering into some of those territories of like Commander Luke, General Grievous, where you're getting like decent banners against, those squads. That's what the Night Sisters were able to do. Now they've definitely kind of taken that step back. There's a little bit more ways to counter them, but they still have some really good uses. I actually think in a PvE setting, they can be fantastic if you bring them in the right areas. Just because of that revive and the way their kits work, like As long as you have Daka and, Asajj at relics, even at this gear, obviously I would take Spirit out and throw someone else in, but this is the optimal Night Sister team. They do a lot of really good things, and if you relic them, you're going to be better off. Even if you're just placing them on defense, you're forcing your opponent to think about how to beat them. Again, guys, just a faction that's going to add that width to your roster. So there you have it. Those are the core factions and special operations units that I've identified as of 2023, right? I've purposefully left off a lot of things on here, right? Like there's no Jedi Knight Luke, there's no Aphra, there's no Inquisitors. There's a whole laundry list of things that just aren't on here. And it's intentional, guys. I'm trying to paint the picture of these are things that, there's no Galactic Legends on this list, right? There's no First Order, there's no Resistance, right? Those are not things that you would build unless you're ready to go for those GLs, right? So like the Hutt Cartel. Whereas like the rest of these things, especially like you go back to the core factions, right? I mean, these are all things that you should be building long before you're ready for whatever they're necessary for. Like obviously with Revan, it's like, okay, well, you're getting Malak, but before you're ready for Malak, this is a great team to have. Obviously, Darth Revan and Bastila Shan Fallen are kind of like, if you're throwing gear at them, you're getting ready to get Darth Malak. That's kind of the way I view them. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. I'd love to see if this is kind of the listing that you have in your heads. I think the core factions are pretty agreed upon across the board. Again, you could argue what characters belong in them, but I kind of based it off of my farming guide and what I think fits in well with each other. That's the video, guys. Again, continue to push the algorithm. Subscribe. I love all of you. May the force be with you. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.